Welcome to the Business Owners Council, Legal Issues from Growth to Exit.
Hello and welcome back to the Business Owners Council, Legal Issues from Growth to Exit. I'm Kevin Rosenquist, and in each episode, I sit down with Kevin BRIC, founder of BRIC Business Law and trusted advisor to Florida companies, to talk through the strategies business owners need to grow, protect, and maximize the value of their business. Today, we're diving into what happens when relationships between partners or shareholders start to fall apart. Kevin has helped Florida companies resolve these conflicts in and out of court, and he's here to share how owners can protect their businesses before things spiral. Kevin, welcome back.
Great to see you again, Kevin.
Yeah, great to see you too. There was one time I was going into a business relationship with some buddies for a podcast, and I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and he was like, "It's like, yeah, you're going to want to do like a operating agreement, contract, and all that." And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that anything's ever going to happen between us. And he just kind of went like this, and he said, "Do you have any idea how many times I've heard that?"
I could totally relate to that.
I bet you can. I'll bet you can. What usually causes the conflict when partnerships start to break down? Because obviously at the beginning, everything's generally should be pretty happy. What usually is the downfall?
Yeah, it's a couple of different things happen with the dynamics. Sometimes one person will feel like they're doing more of the work, or they're taking on more of the risk, or just the partners get in some kind of misalignment about their expectations of working together. Sometimes that comes from not having really clear roles delineated, or they just don't have like a regular communication structure that works. And then sometimes it's just interpersonal issues. People thought they'd work well together, and then they don't. So there's a variety of things that can cause it, but we see kind of those typical patterns playing out pretty regularly.
Yeah, it's definitely a very true statement. You said like you can get along really well with someone. They can be your best friend, your brother, your sister, your wife, your spouse, whatever. Doesn't mean you're going to be good business partners.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a lot, just like kind of like you said, people get into it with the best intentions, and then when you actually start, going through the stress of running a business and working together and figuring out those problems, sometimes it just it becomes difficult, and some of those stresses cause people to hit friction, and it's just that's a typical pattern of how businesses and owners operate with each other.
So if a conflict between owners is left unresolved, what kind of damage have you seen it cause to the company itself?
Well, to the company, it can cause it basically to have paralysis, like the company's unable to operate. If it's got employees, the employees don't know who to listen to. People are giving, conflicting advice and orders. And then that trickles down sometimes into the customer or client level, customers and clients kind of following different people within the business. It can, of course, drain financial resources. Can make the culture very difficult internally. And then, if it's a business that is, building towards something like an exit, like they're trying to build, to an outcome, then sometimes it can really undermine the overall goals of the owners.
Yeah, that's a good point you brought up about the confusion among the staff if you've got employees trying, hearing one thing from one owner, one thing from another, and they're not talking to each other because they're butting heads. So yeah, that trickle down is real.
Oh yeah, it's and you know, sometimes employees end up, it becomes like a popularity contest. Who do they want to work with, and they're all gravitating to one person or the other, and it becomes very difficult internally when it's not just the partners fighting, but it's whole organizations internally just ends up being unable to operate well.
So I led off by talking about how my lawyer friend was like, you need an operating agreement or a partnership agreement, something. For businesses that are just starting out, thinking of starting this, what should be in that partnership or shareholder agreement to reduce the chance of a conflict later?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the dynamic is what you said. It's like at the beginning, everybody's happy and they've got the best intentions. So what you want to do is you want to basically lay out all the sort of rules of the road for the partnership that you can to establish how you're going to solve problems. So it's things like clear ownership, voting rights, defining roles, responsibilities of different people, and then ways you get out of problems. If you're going to require mediation, or if you're going to have buy and sell provisions for certain things, to buy out somebody if like they can't operate in the business anymore. So dispute resolution procedures, access to rights of the business, being able to see the financials, all those kind of different things that allow people to communicate well, operate well, know what they're supposed to be doing, and then have a agreed upon path to resolve conflicts.
Okay. Do you feel like family-owned businesses have even more challenges compared to other partnerships?
Totally.
Yeah.
They definitely do.
You didn't even
Because
hesitate there, Kevin.
no, whenever we have business owners that come together because of long established personal relationships, they can be very positive and they can lead to people working well together if they if they have a lifetime of building trust and they know the type of person they each other is. But also there's like a lot of times there's all these underlying issues as a result of like longstanding family relationships and personal
Mhm.
ones. So as you start working together, that can blur some of the boundaries, right, between personal relationships and business. So a lot of times with inner family dynamics, it creates like succession issues, right? Like if parents, one generation starts it and the next one, there's people who operate well in the business that are their kids, and maybe one of the kids doesn't operate well in it.
Yeah.
um, and you've got a lot of feelings tied to those things that are apart from a normal business that's hopefully making objective decisions. And then a lot of family businesses, kind of like you had with your buddies, it's like there's really they don't want to have any sort of formal governance between them. They feel like they can work it out. They don't anticipate problems because it's their friends, and a lot of times that creates this sort of false certainty that they'll be able to solve things. So yeah, a lot of times that personal or family dynamic gets in the way of being a well-run business.
Yeah, because it's just different, right? I mean, like you just running a business is when money's involved, when growth and scaling and all that stuff is involved. I mean, if you're not on the same page, there's gonna be problems. Yeah,
Yeah, and if as you know, families have problems without running a business, so
very
those
true.
boil back into the business side too. And then it's also hard to, when there is a problem, a lot of emotions sometimes stacked upon what should be maybe a more simple business issue. So yeah, that certainly complicates it.
Yeah, good point. Like every little thing is escalated because it's your family member, where you
Yeah.
have all these underlying other things that you're kind of focused on subconsciously, perhaps, and emotionally. So, if an owner feels like they're being excluded from decisions or even denied access to information, do they have rights under Florida law?
They do. So, obviously, if they have an operating agreement or bylaws, there's rights under those. But if they don't have those, um, under Florida law in general, they have these inspection rights where they're allowed to request and review the financial records of the business, corporate records, key records of how the business runs. And then, of course, as an owner, you are entitled to fiduciary duties from the managers of the business, the people running it. So those allow for, if the fiduciary duties are not being met, somebody's not acting in the best interest of the owners, they can file a lawsuit. They could file a lawsuit on their own behalf if they're being, treated unfairly or their interests are not being preserved. Or they could file like a derivative action to protect the company from harm overall, the company overall. And then they can ask for things like damages if the business is being hurt, or they can actually ask for like injunctive relief to prevent somebody from wasting the assets of the business or whatever it is that's happening. They can go to court and request that type of relief.
Okay. And do you feel like there's certain issues that you see that can often be resolved privately and ones that almost always end up in court?
The ones that end up feeling like they are able to be resolved are generally where the people, they're still aligned on the same goals, but they maybe disagree over how to get there. So
Mm,
it's like they both, or all of them together, want what's in the best interest of the business, but they're just having disagreements. So a lot of times those things can be resolved informally because everybody said they can have like a formal mediation even because they're all willing to sit down and try to work it out. The times where you get court involvement is where there's big stakes and people have all kinds of issues where they've decided they can't work together. There's problems that to them they feel like somebody just wants out. And one factor, of course, is if a business has really good contracts in place, that they're not vague. It's very clear that if this happens, then that right exists, et cetera. So that's always a factor, is if there's good, clear contracts in place, generally that lends itself to having more predictable and, sometimes friendlier outcomes. If people can all see, all right, this is what we agreed on when we start the business. These are the rights that exist. We can all sit down and read that. And so here's what we have to do next.
Yeah, remember when we all sat there and laughed about how nothing would ever go wrong, and
Right,
we
exactly.
prepared for this anyway, and now we can go back and look at it, and ideally that everything we did before helps us now.
Yeah, it's right here on page
Yeah.
55, section J,
Hmm.
subset, so
Yeah.
you can go figure out what you agreed on at the beginning.
Are there signs that you see when that indicate that something is going to go to litigation, like warning signs?
Yeah, so I guess I'd say like the early signs are, a breakdown in communication between people, like they're not responding to their emails anymore, they're missing the meetings, maybe they're making decisions without conferring with the other owners. Sometimes there's a shift in the culture of the company. People can sort of sense that something's going sideways. Um, we talked a little bit earlier about like employees taking sides of different owners. So so sometimes there's this subtle shift, of behaviors that happen, and then of course, like if there's an actual written demand letter or legal threat from an owner, obviously that's a clear sign that something's going sideways, and it may go to litigation.
Boy, some of those things sounded like a relationship, didn't it? I mean, I guess
Yeah,
that's what it is,
exactly.
right? It sounds like a girlfriend boyfriend kind of thing, like where whatever you a partner that you're just like, well, they're not really responding to my texts anymore, and we don't really communicate, and like, that's it is a relationship after
Yeah.
all.
Well, and a lot of people come to us with that. They're saying, "Hey, I just got locked out of the bank account, and
Oh
they're not
wow.
responding to my emails." And so that's those are the signs that we better start having those conversations.
Do you feel like getting outside general counsel involved early can influence the outcomes of these disputes?
Yes, definitely. So, having some clarity through, we've already talked about just having agreements in place before things go wrong. So that sort of proactive step, and that's the role that outside general counsel would usually take, is identifying where there needs to be agreements and what they need to say, and having that ability to have dispute resolution. And then also sometimes just for owners to have maybe like an outside person to sync up with when they have big decisions, or just basically having that sort of advisory counsel there. And then one thing that's sort of subtle but very important is like if there are things brewing in a business internally or even externally, like there's an employee it seems like is going to become a problem, an outside general counsel can help the business sort of position themselves strategically to be able to defend a lawsuit, or be in the best possible position if litigation comes up. So there's sort of that subtle ability to kind of protect the business before something goes wrong in that way as well.
Hmm. You mentioned before the someone being locked out of their bank account. I mean, it's those are some passive aggressive approaches there. Are people just not willing to talk?
Yeah, I mean, well, so generally, what happens in that situation is one person will think the other one is taking out money improperly,
Hmm.
and so that person doesn't think it's improper, and then the person who locked him out says they're trying to protect the business when really it seems like maybe they're trying to hoard the money. So that's a very common scenario, and actually people, they may lock somebody out of the physical location of the business. They actually changed the locks and said don't come in. So there's, it can get pretty sideways between business owners.
Yeah, I would say so. How can business owners start protecting their business against this risk of partnership conflict? Aside from having those things at the very, very beginning, as things move on, what do you recommend to business owners, partnerships?
Yeah, well, outside of the things we talked about having agreements in place, owners, and since we've talked before, I'm a fan of like EOS style running a business. So that basically what that does is it creates an internal communication cadence where everybody's sort of consistently aligned in the business with goals, what they're working towards, who's doing what. And I find that those businesses that are run that way, consistently always checking on alignment, making sure things are assigned, those businesses avoid conflicts better, I find, than those that don't run that kind of operation. And then, obviously I mentioned outside general counsel, but having other advisors too, other professionals who can give good advice at the moment that it's needed. So not waiting until something is going wrong, but like at the outset, have your people that that you can go to, whether it's a mentor relationship or a professional, and you can bounce ideas off of. Just in general, open, honest communication between partners. When something is going wrong, to be able to address it, even if you're saying, "Hey, I'm feeling like things are off between us, and I'd like to get them back on track." And so it just, the simplest things can really go a long way to making sure you don't get to that spot where you're calling somebody and saying, "I'm locked out of the bank account."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, this are all things that any relationship, personal, business, romantic, anything. It's like, if you're not willing to communicate, you got to communicate. If you've got a problem, you got to be honest about it. You can't just bury it deep, because just like in any relationship, that starts to fester, and then all of a sudden, it's harder to come back from.
Yeah, before I really started working with business owners, you have this aura about them, like kind of like they're so, whatever, qualified, excellent at everything. But, as it turns out, like a lot of people who start a business, they're just regular people doing their
Mm-hmm.
best. And it seems like that's kind of like the one thing I see that a lot of business owners that do well have this sort of superpower at. And that's like really good, honest communication with people. They're forthcoming, they're honest, people like to work with them. And so that is the area where I think like those that do a good job do kind of have that aura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. In my experience too, those people definitely are the ones that people gravitate towards and seem to do a good job in holding the ship together.
That's right. And so those are those are the kind of clients we want too. So
Yeah, I don't
people that
doubt it.
yeah, do a good job communicating and running the ship. Those are great people to have in your business.
No doubt. No doubt. All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Business Owners Council with Kevin BRIC. Business partnerships can be powerful, but they can also unravel if you don't have the right protections in place. If you'd like to learn more about how Kevin and his team at BRIC Business Law help Florida owners prevent and resolve disputes, visit bricbusinesslaw.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We very much appreciate it. And we got lots of great information coming your way. Kevin, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you too. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.